Okay, so what I'll do is, since the servers are not connecting, I cannot take any practical part. Okay, so we are left over with one theoretical concept. Like we'll try to discuss that SAP R3 architecture. SAP R3 architecture. Okay, so let us discuss this theory part for half an hour or so. At least we can cover up this. Okay, tomorrow we'll continue with the programming part. Okay. Right. So this SAP R3 architecture means, what do you mean by R3 here? R3 stands for what? Real-time three-tier architecture. Real-time three-tier architecture. Okay. So three-tier means three layers. Okay, three-tier means three layers. So basically, you'll have three layers. One is presentation layer. Okay, presentation layer, and then we'll have application layer, and you will have what? Database layer. Okay, presentation layer, application layer, and what? Database layer. If you take this presentation layer contains all the client machines. Okay, they contain what? Client machines, client systems, I mean to say. Okay, so in this client system, what will be there? SAP GUI will be there. Okay, SAP GUI, graphical user interface software, will be installed. Application layer contains what? Application servers, and database layer contains what? Database server. Okay, so application servers, what is this application server? Responsible for what? Application, we may have one or more application servers. They are responsible for what? Responsible for processing, in the sense they are responsible for executing the what? Business logic. What are the code we write? What are the calculations we'll do? What are the decision making we'll do? Everything will be executed in what? Application server. So it is responsible for processing, nothing but executing the business logic. Database layer is responsible for what? Storing the data. It stores what? Data. Okay. SAP GUI will use it for what? Connecting to what? SAP server. Connecting to SAP GUI we use for connecting to what? SAP server. So it is something like this. See here. So first we'll have what layer? Presentation layer. Presentation layer contains what? Client machine. So here assume that this is a presentation layer where you may have what? Many client machines. In all these client machines, what is the software installed? SAP GUI. So SAP GUI is not the server software. SAP GUI is a client software. Okay, SAP GUI is a client software. Okay, so these are all the client machines. Okay, client one. Okay, so just visualize like this. Suppose if you take the training institute, we'll have only one server. To that server, all the client machines are what? Installed. Or I'll put it in another way. Assume that you're working for a Wipro company, and Wipro is implementing SAP for a customer called as Reliance. So the actual server might be available at what? Reliance Place. The actual server might be available at Reliance Place. In the Wipro company, what will be there? All the client machines will be there. In the client machines, what is the software installed? SAP GUI. So this client machine doesn't contain the actual SAP server software. It contains what? Client software. What is the client software here? Nothing but what? This SAP GUI. SAP GUI. So in all the client machines, assume that SAP GUI is installed. Okay, SAP GUI. So this layer where all the client machines are set up, we call that layer as what? Presentation layer. So I'll put it here. This is your presentation layer. Done. Next, what is the next one here? we'll have what? Application layer. Application layer contains what? One or more application servers. I may have one or more application servers. Okay, and these application servers are responsible for doing the processing. What are the actual calculations that we will do? Everything will be done at what? Application server level. So assume that we have what? One or more application servers. Let me take one application server here. This is one application server. Assume that this is another application server. Like this, we may have what? N number of what? Application servers. So I'll put it like this. This is application server 1, and this is application server 2. Application server 2. So we may have what? One or more application servers. This layer, we call it as what? Application layer. So application layer might contain what? N number of application servers. And then we will have what? Database server. So this is your database server. You will have one database server. So this layer, we call it as what? Database layer. Database layer. Am I recording the session? 1 second. Yeah. Okay. So this is your database layer. So what happens here? These client machines will be connected to what? This application server. All these client systems will be connected to application server. Right. So these client machines might be connected to what? N number of what? Application servers. The same client machine might be connected to N number of application servers. So whichever application server is free, that application server will be used. That application server will be used for what? Processing. Am I clear? So, and all these application servers would be connected to what? One database server. Right, so this is the setup. So all these things are called as what? Client machines, where the client software is installed. SAP GUI software will be installed here. Sorry, SAP GUI software will be installed, and this is your application server. Okay, this is your application server where the actual processing will go on, and this is your what? Database server, and this application server will contain what? Different components. Okay, application server will contain different components. Like it contains a component called as dispatcher. Okay, so let me put it. This component is called as dispatcher. Dispatcher. What is the spelling? Okay, dispatcher. Okay, and there is another important component called as queue. Okay, then another important component called as message server. Okay, you'll have another important component called as gateway server. Okay, this is your message server, and this is your what? Gateway server. Gateway server. Okay, right. So let us understand the purpose of this what? Application server. Yeah. Okay, so message server and what? Gateway server, and this application server might contain different, we call them as work processes. We may have different work processes. This is one work process, this is another work process, dialog work process, update work process, then background work process, and what NQ work process, and you may have what spool work process. All these things are called as what work processes. Okay, these are called as work processes, or we call them as what services. Okay, so we may have many things, but I'm just listing out the important things. So this is first work process, this is second work process, this is your third work process, this is fourth work process, and this is your fifth work process. All these things are called as what work processes. Okay, so let me just differentiate this. These are all what work processes. Assume this is dialog work process. Okay, assume this as update work process. Assume this as background work process. Assume this as what is this NQ work process. This is boring, but this is also important. Okay, for entry point of view, NQ work process, and what else? What else? Spool work process. Work process, or we call them as what services. Okay, this is the overall architecture. So let us understand how it works internally. Right. Okay. So what we will be doing, we'll be sending the request from what? This client machines. Already we know we'll open the logon pad and we'll try to connect to what? SAP server through what? Logon pad. This is nothing but what? SAP GUI. Okay. So whenever we install this SAP GUI, you'll get this particular logon pad. So if it is successfully connected, you'll get the login page. So from SAP GUI, assume that we are connected to what application server. Application layer might contain what one or more application servers. Okay, done. So whatever the request we are sending, that request is received by a component called as what dispatcher. Okay, try to understand. Whatever the request we are sending, that request is received by whom here? Dispatcher. What the dispatcher will do, it will take the request. Okay, dispatcher will take the request coming from the client machines, and that dispatcher will store that request. The dispatcher will store that request inside what? Inside what? Queue. It will store that request inside the queue. So queue is a component where all the user requests are what? Stored. Queue is a component where all the user requests are stored. Depending on the type of request, the request is handed over to what? The appropriate service. Am I clear? Depending on the type of request, the request is handed over to what? Appropriate service, or we call it as what? Work process. I repeat once again, whatever the request we are sending from the GUI, okay, from the logon pad, that is after connecting to the server, whatever you're sending through SAP GUI, that request is sent to what? Application server. In that application server, to which component the request is sent? It is sent to what? To a component called as dispatcher. What is the job of dispatcher here? Dispatcher will take the incoming request and stores that request inside what? Queue. Stores that request inside the queue, and what the queue will do, depending on the type of request, the request is handed over to what? Appropriate server. The request is handed over to appropriate service, I mean to say, or work process. We have different types of services. Some of the important services are dialog service. Now, what is this dialog service means? Dialog service is responsible for performing the IO operations, that is input output operations. Already we know in ABAP, how do we read the input? By using what? Parameters. Yesterday we have seen, by using parameter statement we can read the input. Okay, and then what else? Yeah, dialog set is responsible for what? Performing the IO operations. and the same dialog service will be used to display the result. How do you display the result? By using what? Write statement. Write statement is responsible for displaying the result on what? LPS, list processing screen. List processing screen. Okay. So queue, what it will do, depending on the type of request, it is handed over to what? Appropriate service. One of the service is what? Dialog service. Dialog service main job is what? To perform what? IO operations, input output operations. That is reading the data from the user and generating the output to the user. Those tasks is done by dialog service. Then we have what? Update service. What is the job of update service? Requirement, we'll be dealing with the data. Either you will insert the data, or you'll delete the data, or you'll modify the data, or you'll search the data. So whenever your request is to read, to interact with the database, okay, then the update service will be used. Update service is used for what? Performing what? Database operations. Dialog service is for what? Performing what? IO operations. Update is for what? Performing database operations, like sending the request to database for inserting, or for deleting, or for modifying, or for reading the data. So all those database operations are taken care by what? Update service. Okay. Next we have what? Background service. Okay, we have the background service. Now what is the meaning of this background service is, suppose assume that, try to understand, I developed a report. Okay, assume that I developed a report. What this report has to do, this report should be executed automatically every weekend. Understood? This report should automatically execute every weekend. Okay, every Saturday, assume that at 6 p.m. this report should automatically execute. What this report has to do, so in that 1 week, you might have done many transactions. You might have inserted, deleted, updated, whatever it is. Okay. So what this report has to do, starting from Monday to Saturday, what are the transactions it has, what are the transactions we have done, it has to generate the report based on that particular transactions. Report based on what? Transactions. Am I clear? So this report should automatically execute. I am not going to run it. I am going to develop the report once, and I'm going to schedule the report in the background. I'm going to schedule it in the background. Means I'm going, at the time of scheduling, I'll tell at what date this particular report should be executed. So I'll say every weekend, every Saturday, 6 p.m. this report has to be executed. So when it is executed, it will generate the, it will generate some information, it will generate some log. That log we need to capture. That log will be captured. Okay, where it is captured, again different discussion, but a log is what? Captured. Just like suppose I want to put an alarm in mobile phone. Okay, what you will do? Okay, you can set the alarm, and I can say that every day at 5 a.m. in the morning alarm should come. Okay, so I can schedule it like that. Means without intervention, every day at 5 o'clock alarm will work. Okay, similarly here also, what are the reports we develop in your project? Okay, it's not compulsory that every time we have to execute the report. Once a report is developed, I can schedule that report based on some periodic basis. Means every weekend, or every day, or every fortnight, every 1 month. Understood? Or half yearly, quarterly, the report should automatically execute, and after execution it has to generate the log. So the background service purpose is, it is responsible for managing what? Background jobs. Okay, background service is responsible for managing the background jobs. Background job means what? Which doesn't require what? Any user interaction. Those kind of jobs we call it as what? Background jobs. Or else I'll put it in another way. Suppose today is what? 20th June. Assume that on 1st of July we have scheduled for some object oriented batch. Try to understand. On 1st of July we have scheduled one object oriented ABAP new batch. So what we will do today, that is 20th June, we'll schedule a message saying that every day message should go to what? All the inquiries from what? May 1st to till date. Every day at 6 p.m. the message should go about the new batch. So what I'll do, I'll type the message and I'll set the message in the background. Okay, so what happens every day at 6 o'clock in the evening, the message will be sent to what? All the participants. So that is nothing but called a background job. Means without the user interaction, whatever jobs gets executed, those kind of jobs we call it as what? Background jobs. Am I clear to everyone? Dialog is responsible for performing IO operations. Update is for performing the database operations like insert, update, delete, and what? Read. And background work process, background service is responsible for what? Managing what? Background jobs which doesn't require any user interaction. Any questions so far? Okay, right. So if there are any questions, stop me. Right. So we understood about the background service. Then we have what? NQ service. Okay. NQ service means it is used for placing a lock on the object. It is used for placing a lock on the object. What is the meaning of this placing the lock? Assume that. Try to understand this. Suppose you are working for some project Wipro. So Wipro Hyderabad is implementing SAP for a customer called as what? LOPS. So LOPS is the implementation what? Wipro is the implementation company and LOPS is a customer for Wipro. Now in this project, assume that there are 5 ABAP consultants working. 5 ABAP consultants who are working in this particular project. Okay. Each ABAP consultant will have their own user ID and password. Na? So assume that the user IDs are ABC1, ABC2, like this up to what? ABC5. 5 user IDs are. Okay. Now assume that I am user 1. So ABC1. What I am doing now? In ABAP editor, try to understand. I opened ABAP editor. Okay. In that ABAP editor, assume that I'm developing, I opened a program called as Z10am program 1. Okay. I opened this program in what? Editable mode. Try to understand. I am the first person who has opened this object. Object can be in the form of program, object can be in the form of table, object can be in the form of form, whatever it is. Okay. So I open this object in what? Editable mode. I am doing some changes. Now at the same time, some other consultant also will try to open the same program. So what happens here? When I open in editable mode, what happens? A lock is placed. A lock is placed on this particular object. Who is going to place this lock? By what? NQ service. NQ service will place a lock on the objects which are currently working. Now at the same time, assume that some other consultant is trying to open that in what? Edit mode. When he is trying to open that edit mode, you will get a message saying that so and so person is editing the object, editing not possible. So what you can do, I can open that object only in what? Display mode, because already there is one user working on that particular object and that object is logged on behalf of that particular user. So what is the meaning? No other user is parallelly allowed to modify the same object. If you allow, what happens? It may lead to deadlock situation via operating system concept. Deadlock situation. Deadlock situation is what? If multiple users are trying to access, trying to modify the same resource, it may lead to what? Ambiguity. It may lead to what? Deadlock situation. That is the reason. What you have to understand is whenever we open any object in editable mode, on behalf of your user ID, a lock is placed on that particular object. A lock is placed on that particular object, so that if some other user tries to open the same object in editable mode, it will not allow you to open. We can open only to a display mode. So what is the meaning? Only one user is allowed to what? Make the changes at any point of time. Otherwise, it leads to what? Deadlock situation. So what is the meaning? The job of NQ service is responsible for what? Placing the locks and releasing the locks on the objects. If the locking concept is not there, it will lead to a deadlock situation. That is the reason we use what? NQ service. Hope it's clear to everyone. Yeah. Right. So we understood about the NQ service. Now, what is the other service? Spool service. Yeah. Spool service means, okay, assume that, same example. Assume that we have scheduled a report in the background. We have scheduled a report in the background. So background job. What do you mean by background job? The job which doesn't require any user interaction. It will automatically execute depending on the time period configured. So assume that there is one background job got executed, and that background job has generated some log. It has generated some log, some result. Okay. Now what I need to do, what are the output generated by the background job? I need to take the printout of that. So what you have to do, I should send the request to the printer machine, okay, or I need to send it as a fax. So I need to send the request to what fax machine. So what I can say is spool service is responsible for what? Managing the output devices. Output devices is what? The printer, scanner. Understood? All these things comes under what? Spool service. Am I clear to everyone? You have developed a report. That report has generated some output. Okay. I need to take the printout of that particular result. So what I need to do, my program has to communicate with the external device. Now it has to communicate with the printer device. So that communication is managed by what? A service called as what? Spool service. So it's a simple words. Spool service is responsible for managing the communication with what? External devices like printer machine, fax machine, scanner, blah, blah, blah. So these are the 5 important services related to what? Our application server. And then we have what? Message server. What is the job of this message server? Okay, message server job is what? It is responsible for managing the communication between what? 2 application servers. I may have multiple application servers. No? So to manage the communication between 2 application servers internally, message server will be used. Similarly, we have a gateway server. So gateway server is responsible for managing the communication between two SAP, sorry, between two or between SAP and what? Non-SAP system. Message server is responsible for managing the communication between what? 2 application servers. Okay. Similarly, gateway service is responsible for managing the communication between what? SAP and what? Non-SAP system. In the last week, when I discussed about rise of object development, one of the object I told is what? IDOC. IDOC should be travel from what? One SAP system to another SAP system, or between one SAP system to a non-SAP system. So that communication is managed by what? Gateway server. Okay, and then we have what? Database server, which is responsible for what? Storing the data permanently. As long as you don't interact with the database server, the entire processing will be carried out in what? Application server only. So to summarize the whole thing, how SAP works internally is, okay, what is the architecture? We call it as what? R3 architecture. R3 means what? Real-time 3-tier architecture. 3-tier means 3 layers. Okay, 3-tier means 3 layers. Okay, what are the layers? Presentation layer, application layer, and what? Database layer. Presentation layer contains all what? Client machines. In those client machines, what is installed? SAP GUI is installed. SAP GUI is installed, which is responsible for connecting to the server. Okay, and in the application layer, we may have 1 or more application servers. Why 1 or more application servers? Why 1 or more application servers? If one application server is busy, SAP will make use of what? Another application server for processing, so that it will not take much of time for what? Processing. To return the response quickly, they'll set up what? Multiple application servers. If one application server is responsible for processing a request, then SAP will the request is sent to what? Other application server, whichever is free. And this application server will contain what? Different components like dispatcher, queue, message server, gateway server, and different types of services, or we call it them as work process. Dispatcher job is to receive the request coming from the client machine and store that request inside what? Queue. Okay, store that request inside the queue. And once the request is stored in the queue, depending on the type of request, the request is handed over to what? Appropriate service. We have five types of what? Services. Dialog service. It is responsible for performing what? IO operations. Okay, what are the input you are reading, what are the output you are displaying, all those operations are taken care by what? Dialog service. Means it is responsible for dialog management. And then we have what? Update work process. What is the job of update work process? To manage what? Database operations, inserting, deleting, updating, all those things. Whenever you want to interact with the database, internally, SAP will make use of this particular service. Then background service. What is the job of background service? Which is responsible for managing the background jobs. What do you mean by background job? Which doesn't require any user interaction. I gave an example. I developed a report. So what is my customer report requirement? That report should automatically execute every weekend or every 15 days. The report should automatically execute and generate the log. Okay, so what we'll do, we'll schedule that report in the background. While scheduling in the background, we'll tell SAP what is the time period, whether it is a one-time job, whether it is a periodic job. If it is a periodic job, what are the intervals, all those things will specify. So for executing that background jobs, SAP will make use of what? Background service. Then we have what? NQ service. NQ service means it is responsible for what? Placing the locks and releasing the locks on the objects. Means any object can be edited by only one user at any point of time. If other user also parallelly tries to edit that, it will not allow, because a lock is placed on that object on behalf of what? The user which has accessed that particular object initially. Once a user comes out of that object, the object lock is automatically released. So NQ service is responsible for what? Placing the locks and releasing the locks on the objects. Why we have to place the lock? We will not place, SA will automatically place that. If the locking mechanism is not there, it will lead to a deadlock situation. If multiple users are trying to access the same resource at the same time, then it may lead to what? Deadlock situation. Then we have a service called as what? Spool service. Sometimes from your ABAP objects, we need to interact with what? External devices like what? Printer machine, scanner machine, fax machine. Okay, at that time, SAP will make use of this particular what? Spool service. And database service is responsible for storing the data. And message server component is used for what? Managing the communication between what? Two application servers. And gateway server is responsible for what? Managing the communication between what? SAP and what? Non-SAP systems. Any questions, please ask. So R3 means real time 3 tier, 3 layers. In the training institutes, we'll follow what? R2 architecture. R2 architecture means we'll have all the client machines in the lab, and in one machine only we'll install the server software. In the sense, we'll install both application server as well as what? Database server. So we follow which architecture? R2 architecture. One is computer lab, where all the client machines will be available. In that machine, what is the software we'll install? SAP GUI. Through that only we'll connect to the server. Okay, and when I say server here, in this case, whatever I'm telling, it is a combination of what? Application server and database server. But in the projects, the setup would be something like this. In the training institute, we follow R2 architecture, real-time two-tier architecture. Okay, and here I can add one more component here. I can add one more component called as, one second please. database interface. Database interface. So there is something called as OpenSQL and there is something called as native SQL. So this database interface will convert that OpenSQL to what? Native SQL. You will understand this only when we go to database programming later on. So I can say like this. OpenSQL, it will convert the OpenSQL to what? Native SQL. Just like suppose, just to give an idea, yeah, Narendra Modi is there. Narendra Modi will come to Hyderabad, okay, and assume that he doesn't know Telugu fluently. So what we will do? What he will do? He will speak in what? Hindi, because Hindi is a national language for our country. Okay, so you will speak in what? Hindi. So the local leaders, what they'll do, they'll translate that into what? Regional language. Understood? They're translating that Hindi to what? Telugu. Similarly, if he goes to Bhubaneswar, Orissa, he will speak in Hindi only, and that will be converted to what? Oriya. Understood? So translator. So that is the job of what? Database interface. It will convert the OpenSQL statement to what? Native SQL statement. OpenSQL means which is what? General, which is understood by what? All the database systems. But internally, that OpenSQL will be converted to what? Native SQL by a component called as what? DB interface. Every database will have their own statements. That is nothing but called as a native SQL, which is understood by only that particular database. Right. So this is the overall process. Any questions, please ask. Okay. So here, yeah, here you can see application server services. Application server services. What are the services we have? Dialog service, NQ service, update service, all those things. And I discussed about message server, gateway server, dialog dispatcher, and what queue. So what I'll do is generally I'll keep some theoretical sessions pending. So that kind of issues. Generally, 99.99% we don't have the issues. In case sometimes if you have, so instead of canceling the class, I'll be managing with this particular data theoretical concept. See, every time we cannot guarantee the servers. Okay, 99.99% they'll work, but sometimes because of these things. Okay, anyhow, this is also important. Tomorrow, what we'll do is we'll try to spend little more time and we'll try to cover up whatever we missed today. Okay, so probably by tomorrow our servers will be ready. Okay. And so start practicing whatever the programming part we have discussed in the last 2 3 days. Try to practice it. Tomorrow we'll work on that. Okay. Sure then. So I'll wind off for today. I'll try to share this recording by end of today. Okay. Tomorrow same time 10 o'clock. We'll try to take more time tomorrow.